Hello YouTube community, welcome to How to Make a Bass Jig Part 2, Fluid Bed Painting with Epoxy Powder and Adding Weed Guards. I am recreating my Bass Jig series I put out last year, Making Bass Jigs Parts 1 through 4, and I'm adding a little more detail this time around and also streamlining the video. So come along with me, check this video out, and let's get you making some bass jigs. So you may be asking yourself, what is epoxy powder? Well, I didn't know either, but as it turns out, it's just that. It's powdered epoxy that comes in different shades depending on which manufacturer you get it from. I've got some purple, some brown, and I believe this is green here. It's applied to the head once the head is heated to the proper temperature, and what happens is the powder ends up melting on the head and cures, becoming a nice, durable, hardened paint that you can go out and use your jigs over and over, and they withstand a lot of abuse. In my last video about the powder painting, what I had was a small dish or a little container that I actually poured the powder into, and I would dip the jigs in there after they were heated to a certain temperature, and then I would bake them, and that works fine, and you can watch that video to get that information. But I have stepped it up a notch. I am now using a fluid bed, and what a fluid bed consists of is a PVC container that has a solid bottom. It has a valve on it to adjust the airflow, and the airflow is adjusted because you're connected to an aquarium pump for a regular fish tank, and then that air is pumped through this hose, through this valve, into this base, and then I have PVC containers that fit inside that base, and there are different colors in each one of those containers. So I'll show you in just a minute how all that works. The system I used before works beautifully, and it's perfect if you're only making a handful of jigs for yourself, or maybe you and a couple buddies, or you and your kids, or whatever. But I am making them at a higher production rate, so I need something that I don't have to fight with the powder itself. And the reason I say fight with the powder itself is if you're using it just in a container, what happens is the powder settles down and it's very difficult to dip the jig heads in. The advantage of using the fluid bed is that that air is injected into the material, so it's constantly in movement and it doesn't get settled down in the bottom of the container, making it difficult to dip the jigs in. So it's a much quicker process, and I prefer that, and you'll see that in just a minute. So for fluid bed painting, obviously you need the fluid bed, and you also need to get the pump along with that, the air hose, and then the different color powders. You can buy as many containers as you want to house each different color powder as you use them. Okay, one warning, very serious. When you first fill up your containers with the powder paint, do not leave the lid off when you put the container inside the fluid bed base. If you do this without the lid on, you're going to be the color of whatever that powder paint is. Trust me. Along with that, just make sure that any surface that you're doing this on, you either have covered with something like a drop cloth or something else that will protect the surface. You don't want this to get on your clothes, per my warning there, and also absolutely not on your carpet. If you get it on your carpet, it's not coming out. I don't care what you do. Trust me, once more, I know. Have the lid on your paint when you're getting ready to insert it into the base, and all you simply need to do is just take it and you just kind of wiggle it down in there. It doesn't need to go in very far, and at that point you're ready to connect your hoses to your pump. And what that simply is just grab the pump. I happen to have a pump with 2 valves on it right here, and I just, does not matter which one goes on the right, which one goes on the left, and I just slip them on there just a teeny little bit. Here is another warning. Turn your pump all the way down so it's not on full blast when you plug it in, and close the valve on your fluid bed. Make sure you do this, because if you have that valve wide open and you have this pump on full blast, as soon as you take this lid off, you're going to have a giant mess on your hands. So cut the valve off on the front of the fluid bed, make sure your pump is cut all the way down, and then plug your pump in, because most of these pumps do not have an on-off switch. They just fire up as soon as you plug them in. Okay, so I've turned the pump on, and what I'm going to do is, before I open the valves up, you always want to stir the material up a little bit. I can actually feel it right there. It's kind of tough. It will settle down. I don't care if it's been a day. This stuff, for whatever reason, has this incredible ability to settle on its own. So you're going to see here that the level of the epoxy is about halfway down, and you might wonder, well, why didn't you just fill the thing up? Well, it's because once the air gets forced in it, then the powder will actually almost double in size, and I'm about to show you that. So you crack the valve open on the fish tank pump, and as soon as you open the valve up, you're going to get a little bit of kind of explosiveness, but watch that. Just rising right up there near the top on its own. That's set a little bit too high, so what I will do is lower the pressure till it is just at a slight bubble open, so you can see this stuff comes all the way back up near the top, and that's just going to make a mess for you if you leave it like that. So you cut the valve down there just to where it's kind of a slight little, what would look like a pot of water simmering. You just have a very slight bit of movement. That's about where you want it, and you can actually sit and paint thousands of jigs this way, and that thing will run just like that all day long. No powder, no mess, nothing getting anywhere. You just painting jigs, painting. Okay, so the powder is in there and it's all ready to go, and what I'm going to do is get some jig heads ready, and while I'm doing that, I'm just going to take a lid and put it back on top of that, so in case there is any little bit of powder that wants to jump out of there, this lid will at least keep it from getting out on the table while I'm prepping some jigs. Okay, so like I said, I like to do a lot of jigs. I have poured recently 100 half ounce and 100 3/8 ounce, so I have all of those to paint, and I will prepare a couple like I showed you in my last video and in the series last year, and then I'll pop the camera off for a few minutes and get some ready. What I do to prepare them is I just take a container that will catch any filings and take the jig head, and I actually will file off the burr that's on top of the jig head left over after I cut that sprue off, and you can see right there that the sprue is completely smoothed and gone. Okay, I'm gonna prep a couple real quick and then we're gonna get to painting. Before we start baking, tip of the day, don't use your home oven to do this. Buy yourself a portable oven like this, get yourself a couple bowls that will withstand high heat. Make sure you check the bottom of them to make sure that they are labeled where they can withstand oven temperatures. And you do not want to be using these to eat cereal out of after you've been doing some powder painting. What I do is I turn my oven to stay on indefinitely, and I set the temperature to about 350, 370, somewhere in there. Let the oven heat up. I'm only going to use one bowl for this video, but the reason I have two is because while one is baking, I can actually have another bowl set up and ready to go in as soon as that bowl comes out. So one's cooling while one's baking. These particular bowls that I have hold about 25 jigs comfortably. I don't have 25 prepped and ready, but I can do 25 at a time in one oven. I also have a double toaster oven that's upstate that I use, and I can do 50 jigs at a time. I can make 400 or 500 jigs in one day, and then that way bring them back to the city with me, put them online, and I've got a ton of inventory to sell to people all over the world. And one thing you also want to do is make sure that you have the jigs spaced enough that when you're putting them in and out of the oven, that the heads, the heads will tend to swing, and they'll swing and they'll actually touch one another, and when they are 300, 375 degrees, whatever, they will stick to one another. So make sure you've got enough spacing between the jigs. Okay, we're ready to put them in. Make sure that you have a pair of needle nose pliers, or I prefer needle nose to grab the bowl. I can actually very simply grab and hold the bowl like that. Just make sure you have some pliers to take the bowl out when that thing is piping hot. Let's go ahead and set the bowl in here and let these dudes heat up for about, I don't know, 5-8 minutes, something like that, and we'll get painting here in a second. One thing I will mention while the jigs are heating up is I actually modified my jig mold, and the way I did that is I took a drill bit and I actually drilled through here to a 9/64 diameter hole, so then I can take a 9/64 drill bit blank and set it in here, and the jigs come out with a 9/64 hole inside the jig head. The reason for that is the mold itself comes with 1/8 inch base pins. Those 1/8" base pins are fine if you have them in when you're painting the jig head or if you have Teflon pins in there. But what I like to do is just dip the jigs quickly and get them painted. One thing that would happen though is that the 1/8" hole inside the head for the weed guard would fill up a little bit with paint and I could not glue the weed guards in. So for years, I just drilled the heads out with a 9/64 bit. Finally, I modified the mold and I used 9/64 drill bit blanks there now instead of the 1/8" base pins. And I'm able to just paint the entire head and not worry about the paint going inside the cavity. And when it's all done, I can just glue the weed guards right in place and I don't have to modify anything else. So it's a much more efficient process for me. Okay, so we're about ready to paint, and what I do is I'm just gonna pop the lid off of the powder paint here, and it is still just boiling away for me. You can always adjust it a little bit if you need to. So I'm gonna dip a couple in here now, and then I'm gonna move the camera so you can actually see me dip the jig head into the fluid bed and how that works. Okay, so when you dip it in, just do it really quickly, tap it off on the side so the powder falls out of the cavity for the weed guard, and then just hang it right back on the side of the bowl. Grab your next one, dip it in, tap it, put it right back, and it goes that quick. Okay, let's grab one out of here, dip it, tap it off, and then the powder has fallen out of the cavity where the weed guard's going to go. That is key. Grab another one, same deal, dip it, tap it off, powder comes out of the head where the weed guard cavity is, and just keep on rolling one after another. All right, so now that all the jigs have been dipped in the paint, just got to give them about 15 minutes and we'll pull them out and put the weed guards in. So it's time to take them out of the oven, and I just simply set them on top of my oven here because that'll hold the weight of the bowl no problem, and that is a perfect spot to cool the jigs. And just cut my oven off and let them cool down. They actually cool pretty quickly. The bowl seems to retain heat quite a long time, but the actual heads will cool down in just a few minutes. Okay, well, we got some beautifully painted jig heads here, all ready for weed guards. All right, I'm not gonna spend a great deal of time on doing the weed guards because you simply go to the hardware store, get some 5-minute epoxy or some 30-minute epoxy, and the 30-minute epoxy just tends to be a little stronger. That's what I prefer to use, and you just squeeze out 2 equal amounts and mix them thoroughly. Take a weed guard, roll it in the epoxy to get a bead of glue on the end of the weed guard, and then just roll the actual weed guard right there at the opening of the jig so it coats it nicely, and there you have a completed bass jig with the weed guard in place. And if the glue bubbles up just a teeny bit around the weed guard, that's okay. It generally settles down. Once again, roll it, put it in place, and you are done right there. If it does not settle down a little bit and it's bubbled up, I guess I would much prefer to have a little bit of extra glue than not enough glue. So roll it inside the cavity, push it in place, make sure it's seated, and there you have a finished jig head. All right, everybody, well, that's going to wrap up how to make a bass jig part 2. We've got our painted jig head with the weed guard added, and ultimately by part 4, we're going to have one of these bad boys right here, a fully prepared bass jig ready to go out and slay some big bass. So you guys are going to make it. We're going to work together for it, and I hope you guys like this video, and you also subscribe. Leave your comments below, and I'm more than happy to get back to you and answer any questions. So join me on part 3, making skirts, and I'll see you on the next video. Tight lines, everybody.